Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Yo soy Melina Altamirano, profesora investigadora del Centro de Estudios Internacionales de aquí del Colegio de México. Les damos las gracias por acompañarnos el día de hoy a esta primera mesa de apertura de este evento conmemorativo por los 65 años del Centro de Estudios Internacionales del Colegio de México. Abrimos con una conferencia de lujo. Tenemos con nosotros al profesor Massimiliano Tomba, que dirigirá unas palabras acerca de la carrera hacia el autoritarismo, The Race Toward Authoritarianism, y su ponencia será comentada por el profesor Ilan Bisberg del Centro de Estudios Internacionales de aquí del Colegio. Voy a presentar muy brevemente a nuestros ponentes. El profesor Tomba tendrá aproximadamente 35 minutos para hacer su ponencia y después el profesor Ilan Bisberg dará sus comentarios, aproximadamente 15-20 minutos. Y nuestro objetivo también es, por supuesto, recoger sus preguntas y comentarios, entonces tendremos un espacio dedicado a ello. El profesor Massimiliano Tomba es doctor en Filosofía Política por la Universidad de Pisa y actualmente catedrático de Historia de la Conciencia en la Universidad de California, Santa Cruz. Se especializa en la filosofía alemana clásica. Desde 2012 ha codirigido un proyecto internacional cuyo propósito es repensar los esquemas de interpretación de la sociedad global para superar el eurocentrismo en los conceptos de universalismo, espacio y tiempo. Es autor de Revolution and Restoration, The Politics of Anachronism, publicado en 2025, y también de Insurgent Universality, An Alternative Legacy of Modernity, publicado en 2019. Esto solo para mencionar sus publicaciones más recientes. El profesor Ilan Bisberg es maestro en Ciencias Políticas por el Colegio de México y doctor en Ciencias Sociales por la Escuela de Altos Estudios de París. Es profesor e investigador en el Centro de Estudios Internacionales del Colegio de México y ha realizado estancias en diversas instituciones internacionales. Entre sus líneas de investigación se encuentran el análisis de los procesos de globalización, la evolución del sindicalismo, las trayectorias socioeconómicas de países latinoamericanos y las transformaciones políticas y del estado de bienestar desde una perspectiva comparada. Entre sus libros más recientes se encuentran Four Worlds of the Welfare State in Latin America, publicado en 2024, y Diversity of Capitalisms in Latin America, de 2019, entre otras muchas publicaciones. Muchas gracias a nuestros ponentes. Muchas gracias, profesor Tomba. Adelante.
Thank you so much for your introduction. Thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure and I think a great opportunity to, let me do like this. And then I think it would be a fantastic opportunity to discuss and think together with colleagues, with all of you about authoritarianism, democracy. I also want to express a special thank to Ilan for his comments, and I also need to apologize because I didn't send him my text, and it was generous enough to look around, and he found a couple of articles I wrote on times and temporalities, and he will work with some of my previous publications. Again, I apologize. The point is that I usually don't have you can see, I have my handwritten notes. This is how I like to present things. I have some citations. It's well organized. I'm not here to cheat you, but I also, I was trained in a more dialogical culture. So when we present, we like to think together and to make some interruptions and try to go in a tangential direction. We'll see what happens today. So in any case, as I said, is well structured. I deserve the reimbursement. So the paper I'm going to present today is organized, is divided in three parts. The first part is, it refers to authoritarianism as a as a conflict or the result of a conflict between temporalities and between, I would say, incommensurable temporality, incompatible temporalities. This is the first part. The second part, I will try to investigate the kind of a long erosion of intermediary bodies, counterpowers, associations, assemblies. And that story is a long story that, in my opinion, goes back all the way to the origin of the so-called modern state. The third part will be just a reference in my conclusion, and is about the many forms of pseudo access to politics and participation through new media and social media, but it will be just a line in my conclusion. It's something I'm thinking about, but and maybe it's worth it to be discussed in the Q&A. So let me start with a kind of a self-citation. In 2015, I presented a paper. At the time I was in New York, and the paper was about the clash of temporalities and authoritarianism. When I presented the paper, it was at the CUNY, City University of New York, a colleague, a political scientist, made an objection. And basically, he said that in my analysis of authoritarianism, I didn't consider the many former Soviet real socialist states which were actually transitioning into democracy. So basically said, you know, on the basis of data, you're wrong. And at the time, the president of the United States was Obama, so everything is fine. So why are you so pessimist? Why are you talking about authoritarianism and the authoritarian turn? Okay, my point was that that was my analysis at the time. I thought it was very abstract, if you want. You know, I'm trained as a philosopher. So my point was that there is a conflict, there is a tension, and we're talking about temporalities now, a tension between the fast temporality of financial capitalism and the slow pace of democratic procedures. And the latter, the democratic procedures, are pressured to accelerate in order to catch up with the former, with the financial temporality, and in the name of efficiency, to curtail the slower process of democratic deliberation. So the point is, what is the right pace of the decision-making process? In other words, I said at that time the two temporalities are incompatible or incommensurable. Democracy, or better, the democratic procedures designed in the post-Second World War and incorporated in many different constitutions, these procedures have become an obstacle. They slow down the process. At that time, in Italy, I was still professor at the University of Padua. At that time in Italy, the prime minister was Matteo Renzi. Matteo Renzi was not a right-winger. He was a left Democrat prime minister. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to change the constitution in order to speed up the decision-making process. So, for that reason, I thought, look, this race toward authoritarianism is not only a right-wing thing. And we have to consider that. We need a different paradigm. We need a different analysis. And moreover, this authoritarian turn is now present in so many different states. So how can we make sense of the fact that there is authoritarianism in the US, Italy, Hungary, India, and so on and so forth? The list is very long. So then we need a pattern that basically is able to give us some rationale about what is going on, that is not only, that doesn't depend only on the craziness of some politicians or the fact that the people are manipulated. So I want to be very clear. So I don't buy it. I cannot start thinking in these terms that, something bad happened because there is a bad guy, the president, and because the people are stupid. I don't think we go far enough with this kind of interpretation. So, and then I go back to my temporalities, that is, again, abstract enough, so that I don't need to address the personalities of the politicians or the people. So at that time, when I was working on this clash of temporalities, I basically built my argument in conversation with the works of different people. Obviously, I was not alone. On the one hand, there was Sheldon Wallen, who wrote a short piece whose title was, What Time Is It? And Sheldon Wallen argued that political time, I cite, political time is out of sync with the temporalities, rhythms, and pace governing economy and culture. Out of sync. Similarly, a critical geographer, Wayne Hoppe, in an essay, in an article titled Conflicting Temporalities, published in 2009, wrote that the slower temporal rhythms of nation states are marginalized by the transnational proliferations of soft law and fast policy. So, back to my point, I say, okay, these different temporalities are not only out of sync, but they are incompatible. What does it mean they are incompatible? It means that if we speed up the decision-making process, the political process, we have to give up on democracy. So we cannot have long, slow democratic procedures. So the most suitable political form for a very fast decision-making process is basically a dictatorship, an authoritarian regime, or a permanent state of exceptions, or a government that basically uses executive orders all the time. So that was my understanding, and I thought that for that reason, at that time I used the future, and now I can use the past tense. At that time I wrote that we will see more and more revolutions from above. So we will see more and more attempts to change the Constitution in order to try to resynchronize the two temporalities. But I think it's not possible. A few years after my talk in 2018, The Economist published an article, just to see where we are now, more or less, published an article on the state of democracy in contemporary world. Obviously, the climate was different, and The Economist started seeing the world, contemplating the world from a very, if you want, a US-centric perspective. At that time, the president of the US was no longer Obama, but was Trump. And The Economist wrote, democracy continues its disturbing retreat. More than half the countries in the latest update of the Democratic Health Index saw their scores decline. and so on and so forth. So there was a kind of an alarm. And a few months after the publication of this article in The Economist, also, we are still in 2018, The Week published another article on the same argument, and he concluded the article with this question. The question is if that's the question that the liberal Democrats need. So the question of authoritarianism is the question that the liberal Democrats need to answer before they are completely swept away. I think, and I will try to say why, that liberal Democrats are not equipped enough to find an answer. And probably even the concept or term liberal democracy has to be questioned. A second thing is what if, as a kind of a thought experiment, we try to think that populist movement, that very often they are assimilated to right-wing movements or anti-democratic movements. So in Italy, very often the label populist means anti-democrat. So populists are the Five Stars movement, the populists are, so everything that basically disturbs the normal procedures of the liberal democratic state becomes kind of a populist. I disagree. I think so for many reasons. Populism is a kind of a gigantic umbrella that includes too many things. And when a concept is too vague, it means it doesn't explain anything. And then the second thing, I ask myself a different question. And the question is, what if populism is the wrong answer to the right question? But at least they get the question right, whereas the left doesn't even get the question right. That is my personal thought experiment, just to provoke myself, try to think outside of the box and see what you can find it. So then, talking about the populism and temporalities again, I think I'm burning all my time. I have to speed up or cut some parts. Okay, in any case, to talk about temporalities, in the 70s, there was a sociologist from Argentina, Gino Germani, and I think he has a very interesting interpretation, reading of populism, because he says that populism basically emerges when when different elements, different strata of a society are out of sync. He says, I cite Germani, that the coexistence of advanced groups and lagging groups, atrasados groups, this tension generates a whole series of asynchronies in the process of a transformation. Germani was good enough to understand that there is also a kind of a psychosocial dimension that emerges when these strata are in tension with each other, when there is a conflict, when there is a friction among strata. Then he observed that some social strata manifested this is Germani, the impulse to recover the traditional way of life as a part of an active propensity to reestablish the equilibrium between the psychological and the normative and environmental levels, which may involve a change in social structures, in their norms and environment. So I think this is a good starting point to try to understand what is going on in our societies and try to understand that we have, again, different strata of the population that are out of sync. Some of them, they feel they are really, they had been left behind, and they are full of anger and resentment. But we cannot call this anger and resentment stupid. It is a real sentiment. It's an emotion, and it is full of energy. The point is that the right wing, they know better how to use this pent-up energy. And I cite other two authors. Now we go back into the 30s. Basically, they were studying, they were trying to understand the rising of fascism and National Socialism. So one of them is Wilhelm Reich, kind of a crazy psychologist, but also smart. And Wilhelm Reich, in his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, published in 1933, he talked about different layers of the biopsychic structure. And these layers, he said, they are out of sync. Again, the same terminology. This is fascinating. You know, not only social strata, but now we have a psychological level that are out of sync. And fascism understood how to use the friction between them. Fascism, he says, drew its energy from the old millennial layer, still charged with rapacious and envious impulse. So, again, the point is what do you do with this attention? And Wilhelm Reich understood that at that time, the left, or his interlocutors, the Communist Party, they were not able to address the right question. He says, while we presented the masses with a superb historical analysis and the economic treatises on the contradictions of imperialism, basically, he's talking about us, the academics. Hitler stirred the deepest roots of their emotional being. As Marx would have put it, we, the left, we left the praxis of the subjective factor to the idealists, is citing the thesis on Feuerbach. And we, the left, we act like mechanistic, economistic materialists. So we have to find a way to address the subjective dimension of this conflict, not only the objective. Oh, there are many contradictions and so on. And I think this is still the case, and this is something we have to think about. Another, I don't want to spend my time to think of, to expand this other point of view, but Ernst Bloch in 1932 had a kind of a similar analysis of a kind of a society that is out of sync. And in his analysis of fascism, he wrote, this is the first line of his essay, not all people exist in the same present. They do so only externally, by virtue of the fact that they can be seen today. So we share the same present, but that does not mean they live in the same time as others. I think this is the case for so many different countries. Yes, that requires not an abstract analysis, that requires a case-by-case analysis. And again, I think populist movements are pretty good in using and analyzing and using, I would say, these tensions. You know, let's spend 30 seconds. No, I don't have time. It's already, I can see only 10 minutes. Okay, I think I have to cut off some of the stuff. Okay, so this is the kind of analysis that we can do with temporalities and the conflict of temporalities. But there is a second dimension, as I anticipated in my introduction, that has to be analyzed. And the second dimension is about, let me put it this way, so I can build a kind of a bridge between what I just said and what I want to say. So these strata of the population that had been left behind, and they are acting with a kind of anger, resentment. They also want their voice to be heard. They also want to find different channels to participate in the political life. Now the point is, what kind of channels do we have for political participation? And this is my second point. I will go a little bit fast, but I hope I will be clear. So my point is, as I said, the state is going in this direction. That is, the state is speeding up processes of decision-making. The state is dismantling some essential democratic procedures, and the state doesn't give so much room to forms of political participations because they would slow down the process. Now my point is, sorry, I have to compress because I want to go to my point. So my point is this is not new. This is not a new phenomenon at all. My point is to be dramatic, that basically the modern state was born without, actually, no, the state was born in war, at war with intermediary bodies. The state was born at war with all these forms of associations and assemblies. The French Revolution, with Le Chapelier, declared associations, assemblies, and corporations illegal because incompatible with the idea of the sovereignty of the people, incompatible with individual human rights, and so on and so forth. So the French Revolution was a gigantic machine that worked to destroy intermediary bodies. The people who wanted intermediary bodies, associations, assemblies, corporations, they were the enragés, they were the radical sans-culottes, and they were the women in their clubs and associations. They wanted new forms of participation. But the French Revolution took this other trajectory, a trajectory to which Condorcet, for example, totally agreed with. Condorcet was on board on dismantling these anachronistic corporations because they sound and they look so much as the Ancien regime. We are talking about groups with authority and power, groups that can stop the convention. For that reason, Robespierre and the terror got rid of not only all these assemblies, but all the clubs. So the terror is not a deviation, as a Fourier would have said, a dérapage. No, the terror is not a dérapage. The terror is the accomplishment of the project of the French Revolution, concentration of power and the elimination of all these intermediary bodies. It sounds a little bit provocative, but this is what I want to discuss. So if this story makes sense, one can go even back, further back, and one can say, yes, basically the French Revolution realized the theoretical project of the modern state that you can already find in Hobbes' Leviathan, to be a little bit philosophical here. So in Hobbes, so what you have to think is that things are the other way around. The assumption of the modern state is not an atomized society, a society constituted by atomized individuals, and then the unity that is created by the state. It's the other way around. The state is a machine that atomizes a society, because a society otherwise is well organized. What the Desenragés, what the people in the French Revolution wanted to do, they wanted to restore the social fabric. The revolution worked in the opposite direction, atomization of the society. So the work of the state is atomizing society. This is my point. Then there is I have 5 minutes, maybe 4. Now the point is now we have a problem. And you know, many thinkers saw the problem. Let's say at that time, in one of his lectures, Hegel, 1824-25, lectured to his students that we need to restore corporations. Die Aufgabe in der Zeit ist, Korporationen zu bilden. We have to rebuild corporation. We have to rebuild corporation because we need intermediary bodies. Otherwise, we are screwed. Otherwise, the state goes basically in the direction of the abstractions that Hobbes is talking about. And we have to prevent that direction by rebuilding a social fabric. And we have it, taught Hegel. We have a corporation. Tocqueville, a little bit later, had a similar insight. And he understood that we need to establish some limits. Otherwise, tyranny can emerge. And in the past, we had, said Tocqueville, we had customs, we have aristocratic limits. And then they were functional to the limitation of the power of the king. So the king didn't become a tyrant. But equality and democracy are eroding the authority of the past customs and the authority of these social barriers. So basically, there is nothing between individuals and sovereignty, and this is a problem. We need an antidote, and the antidote for Tocqueville was the constitution of free associations of citizens. So we are back to the point. We need a free associations of citizens, which basically, this is an interesting thing, they replace the work of the aristocracy in the Ancien Regime. So it's a similar dynamic. The monarchy was going in the direction of a concentration of power. The aristocracy act as a kind of a counterpower. The aristocracy is over. We don't have a counterpower, we can have a free associations. Obviously, there were free associations when Tocqueville wrote about democracy in America, and they were in Europe, at least, or in France, that he knew pretty well. There were socialist associations and assemblies. But one can say that Tocqueville didn't want to go in that direction, obviously. And then his idea of a free associations can be even understood as a kind of a polemical term in order to create something that is not the socialist assemblies. But the socialist assemblies worked pretty well as a counterpower, as a form of a limitation for the concentration of power. Now, my point is what? That without that social, I have 1 minute, without that social pressure, without that conflictual dynamic between society and the state, the legal mechanism of the state implodes, and the state not only gets rid of all these restrictions, but the state, this is my second provocative statement, does not degenerate. The state goes back to its normal, regular path. The exception is the fact that we have counterpowers. The logic of the state, if you read political theory, the logic of the state doesn't require counterpowers. In Hobbes, they are unthinkable. But there are counterpowers. So the exception in the grammar, in the legal political grammar of the state, is that there are counterpowers. If there are no counterpowers, the state is just doing what the state is programmed to do. Go back to the regular path, in which basically there is nothing between the state and the individuals. That is a problem. And then at that point, probably we can start thinking that a lot of legal procedures that we celebrate when we talk about democracy, check and balance, and so on and so forth, they were actually the result of a compromise. They were not embodied in the grammar of the state. They were the result of a compromise. The compromise that result from the conflict between the state and society. So without that conflict, there is no need for a compromise. Why should I preserve check and balance? Why should I care about these mechanisms which are in function only as a compromise? Why should I celebrate liberal democracy that was actually, historically speaking, a kind of a polemical concept that emerged in the 20th century as a counter-concept against socialism? So now you understand that if a socialism is over, where is the life? From where liberal democracy can take energy? If liberal democracy has been used as a polemical concept. So if you take away the opponent, a polemical concept implodes and disappears. So I would say, enough with the liberal democracy. And now, okay, I really want to conclude. Give me 35 seconds. In 35 seconds, so, okay, is a dark scenario? I don't know, maybe yes. But I think, so first of all, a couple of things I can understand. So first of all, authoritarianism as a fascism in the 20s and 30s is not a parenthesis, is not a deviation, as my fellow Italian Benedetto Croce said. It's not a Benedetto Croce. It's not a parenthesis. It's here to stay. Even more, I would say, is also a kind of a going back of the state into its regular path. Obviously, many things can happen. So and we can find a new compromise. It's possible, but we have to be very aware that it will be just a new compromise. And it can last for 20, 30 years if we are lucky. And so I don't know. I'm not a political scientist. I don't do predictions. I just try to understand what is the logic of these things. So the point is in a certain way, and this is the interesting thing, that I see more and more people around who are in different ways. We disagree. But in different ways, Nadia Urbinati didn't come. I disagree with Nadia Urbinati, but I also agree on many things because she also says, we need to rethink the function of intermediary bodies. And for her, parties are intermediary bodies. It's good. So I think this is something that has to be taught, has to be addressed. In a few words, probably the pharmacon, the way out from our terrible situation can be found not in some adjustment at the level of legal procedures, but at the level of how can we reorganize a society, or how, now we cannot do it, how society can reorganize itself in terms of assemblies, groups, intermediary bodies. So the medicine, the pharmacon is obviously at the level of societies and not at the level of different legal procedures or a way to fix some mechanism that apparently do not work well today. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias al profesor Tomba por plantear estas ideas, que me parece son un excelente punto de partida para las discusiones que tendremos durante esta jornada, y también por la atención al tiempo. Muchas gracias. Doy la palabra a Ilan Bisberg para su comentario. Adelante, Ilan.
Okay, muchas gracias. Creo que no voy a ser mucho más optimista que Massimiliano. Y bueno, quisiera decir que en este comentario voy a analizar algunas de las ideas que ha propuesto Massimiliano Tomba en su conferencia. Realmente sí coincide bastante bien mi comentario con lo que ha dicho, aunque como dijo no tuve la oportunidad de leer su ponencia, aunque por supuesto de manera indirecta entonces a sus ideas, porque me baso en varios de sus artículos que leí para esta ocasión. Voy a responder a sus ideas, elaborar algunos elementos desde mi perspectiva, así como añadir mis puntos de vista que espero que se entiendan como una discusión con su ponencia. Antes de entrar de lleno en las ideas de Tomba, que considero más originales y que se relacionan con mis propios trabajos sobre temporalidad, quisiera proponer una idea general sobre la democracia, que es, como ya lo planteó el ponente, es un régimen frágil y muy exigente de sus ciudadanos. Myriam Revaud-Dallon, en su libro ¿Por qué no amamos la democracia?, analiza el argumento central de Claude Lefort en el sentido de que, mientras que en la monarquía el espacio político estaba incorporado por el rey, por el cuerpo del rey, y estaba legitimado de manera metasocial, religiosa, tradicional, en la democracia desaparece todo rastro metasocial y el espacio de poder se vuelve un espacio vacío que no es ocupado por nadie. Esto en la medida en que el poder es ejercido por un sujeto, por un partido o por un grupo de partidos que solo lo ocupan temporalmente hasta las siguientes elecciones. La democracia es entonces el régimen de la incertidumbre. Nunca es claro cuánto tiempo y quién va a ocupar el vacío del poder, y en esa medida muchos movimientos sociales, movimientos políticos han tratado de llenar este espacio con ideas como nación, verdad, patria, justicia, raza y pueblo. Bueno, en sus artículos y en su ponencia, Tomba afirma que la fuente del descontento que ha dado lugar al auge de los movimientos y partidos de derecha, descontento o incertidumbre, es el aumento de la incertidumbre producida por la asincronía entre las temporalidades políticas, económicas y jurídicas, y yo añadiría subjetivas, que se han producido en las últimas décadas, más que la globalización y la desigualdad que se han producido desde los años 80 por causa de esta, aunque obviamente la desigualdad, la globalización añaden e influyen en esta incertidumbre y en este desencanto. En primer lugar, se ha producido un desacople, dice Tomba, entre la economía y la democracia, lo acabo de mencionar. a causa de la financiarización. La financiarización de la economía impone una velocidad de toma de decisiones que rebasa a las democracias, que están basadas en la lentitud del proceso participativo. Esto es correlativo con la asincronía entre la propia economía real y la financiera. Los especuladores están comandando cada vez más a las empresas, más que los directivos de esas propias empresas. El ahorro en bolsa exige retornos muy rápidos, los inversionistas en bolsa buscan ganancias cada vez más rápidas, porque, como dice la Escuela de la Regulación, Robert Boyer, entre otros, las finanzas son más impacientes que la producción. El hecho de que las finanzas dominen la economía real y, más recientemente, que se utilicen algoritmos ultra rápidos en las transacciones en bolsa, tiene como consecuencia su desacople de la economía real, que se caracteriza por la lentitud de la inversión, de la innovación y de los desarrollos tecnológicos. Este desacople puede modificar el rumbo de una economía rápidamente, lo que puede tener efectos devastadores sobre la vida de los ciudadanos de un país y del mundo, como lo vimos en la crisis global de 2008-2009. Los sistemas políticos democráticos, o no, inclusive, no tienen la rapidez de respuesta y pierden legitimidad al no poder contrastar los efectos nocivos de la economía financiarizada sobre las poblaciones. Tomba también menciona la asincronía entre la temporalidad nacional y la supranacional. Un ejemplo, la Unión Europea responde a decisiones de sus dirigentes en Bruselas, que son medidas ejecutivas que dependen de un proyecto global, que no toma en cuenta los tiempos y necesidades nacionales. Los tecnócratas nacionales pretenden aplicar la temporalidad supranacional de Bruselas a una temporalidad nacional sin poder considerar, por la urgencia, realmente el ritmo en el que los empresarios, los trabajadores, los agricultores logran y pueden ajustarse y quieren ajustarse a las nuevas directivas. Tomba también discute varios escritos sobre el fascismo clásico que mencionó, que hablaban sobre las discordancias de la temporalidad entre diversas poblaciones que viven en un mismo espacio. Cita a Bloch en el sentido de que no todas las poblaciones viven en el mismo ahora. Por su parte, también cita a Germani, quien escribió sobre el populismo y que decía el cambio es asincrónico. Esto significa que mientras algunos grupos están en plena modernización, en los años 30, 40, 50, otros están enraizados en patrones tradicionales. Algunos sectores han sido dejados atrás en el proceso de modernización y ahora en el proceso de globalización. Y son estos sectores los que componen la base del fascismo, o los que componían la base del fascismo en el pasado y de la deriva fascista actual. Estos son sectores que han sufrido el desclasamiento. Las poblaciones de clase media en los Estados Unidos, en el Midwest, y las que en Francia decidieron vivir en ciudades medias alejadas de los grandes centros urbanos y que generaron el movimiento de los Gilets jaunes en 2019. Las que viven en lo que fue en Alemania del Este, consideran que ni el presente ni el futuro corresponden a sus aspiraciones y que el pasado fue mejor. Esas poblaciones se perciben a sí mismas como perdedoras de la globalización, lo que ha generado un sentimiento no solo de injusticia de parte de sus gobiernos, sino de desprecio por el resto de la población. Acordémonos de lo que Hillary Clinton dijo en una de las conferencias que dio en un debate, basket of deplorables, ¿no? Los llamó, y en cierta medida se sienten, esas poblaciones que votan por Trump, se sienten desconsideradas, despreciadas por la población de las costas y por las políticas que los gobernantes de las costas han llevado a cabo. Y esto se vincula con una idea central para Axel Honneth, que es la falta de reconocimiento de estas poblaciones se ha vuelto central. para entender cómo los individuos se relacionan con la política y cómo ésta responde a ella. Está presente en estas poblaciones lo que define Hartmut Rosa como una aceleración del tiempo, que ha significado un descoplamiento del tiempo vivido del tiempo social. Los cambios tecnológicos han conducido a que la economía tenga que innovar cada vez más rápidamente y a que surjan nuevas ramas de actividad que requieren de otras capacidades y conocimientos, que entonces nuestras habilidades, conocimientos, caduquen rápidamente. Pensemos cómo por cientos o miles de años un campesino cultivaba la tierra de la misma manera que su padre, abuelo y así por generaciones. Cómo por cientos de años un artesano o inclusive un obrero laboraba igual que sus antepasados. Actualmente, en el lapso de unas décadas y cada vez más de unos años, lo que sabemos hacer se vuelve inútil y las capacidades profesionales y obreras caducan varias veces en el lapso de una vida humana. El tiempo cultural también se ha acelerado. Cambios culturales que en el pasado tomaban una generación o más suceden en el lapso de una misma generación. Tomba menciona cómo Wilhelm Reich decía que la ideología y las estructuras psíquicas cambian más lentamente que las condiciones sociales, de las cuales derivan y cómo entran en conflicto con las nuevas formas de vida. Los cambios culturales acelerados que se han sucedido en la actualidad, como el quiebre de la familia, el arribo de migrantes con costumbres y religiones distintas, el nuevo papel de la mujer, el matrimonio igualitario, la erosión de todo tipo de autoridad, han acentuado esa fuente de incertidumbre para amplios sectores de las poblaciones y lo que ha dado a una ofensiva cultural conservadora de las extremas derechas de muchos países, basada en ese sentimiento de estas poblaciones de estar perdiendo todo tipo de marcos conceptuales, epistemológicos. Bueno, y de vida. A todo ello se añade un sentimiento aún más profundo de falta de puntos de referencia temporales, dado que, como dicen muchos autores, entre ellos Tomba, por supuesto, estamos viviendo en un presente continuo sin perspectiva. Tomba nos recuerda la manera en la cual la Ilustración destruyó la autoridad de la tradición, la presencia del pasado en el presente. A partir del propósito de Descartes de hacer tabla rasa de todo lo que conocemos para construir una nueva idea de lo que sabemos y somos, solo el futuro se hizo accesible como alternativa al pasado. Y el futuro estaba garantizado por el progreso. No obstante, en la actualidad la idea de progreso está en crisis, lo que tiene como consecuencia, como escriben Koselleck y Hartog, que vivimos en un presente continuo que se renueva cada vez más rápidamente, pero que está caducado, que está estancado, ya que no apunta ni conduce a ningún lado más que a sí mismo de manera permanente, algo que ellos llaman el presentismo. Todo ello ha tenido como consecuencia que la incertidumbre fundacional de la democracia se acreciente y origine el contexto sociocultural y establezca el contexto sociocultural sobre el cual los movimientos de extrema derecha pretenden movilizar a las poblaciones hacia un regreso a un pasado inventado y a un rechazo a lo diferente. O como dice Tomba, hacia un futuro en el pasado, a un sentimiento de continuidad, tradición, estabilización para hacer frente a una sociedad caracterizada por disrupciones, desarraigo e inestabilidad. Pero esto no está sucediendo, de manera indeliberada, sino que está siendo provocado por movimientos de extrema derecha, cada vez más cercanos a lo que se puede definir como fascismo. La pregunta es, ¿cómo logra el autoritarismo apoderarse de las conciencias de estas poblaciones para adelantar su agenda neoconservadora? Para responder es necesario analizar la extrema acentuación del individualismo en el mundo moderno y los mecanismos accesibles a los movimientos de extrema derecha, para lo cual vamos a referirnos al trabajo de Eva Illouz. En primer lugar, la caída del muro de Berlín dio lugar a un capitalismo sin adversario, que se liberó de tener que conciliar el mercado con el bienestar de los trabajadores. Va en el sentido de lo que dijo Tomba, solamente que llevado a la actualidad. Él dice, el Estado nunca ha querido los intermediarios, el Estado nació en guerra con los intermediarios, y lo que yo estoy tratando de explicar es que a partir de los años 1989 se dio rienda suelta a la destrucción de las intermediaciones, como también ya lo dijo, ¿no? Entonces, por otra parte, la financiarización de la economía tuvo como consecuencia la desindustrialización, la sustitución de trabajos manufactureros por otros en el comercio y los servicios, peor pagados, temporales y sobre todo sin representación social alguna. Por otra parte, el incremento de la desigualdad al interior de los países más ricos está desgastando a las clases medias, que eran mayoritarias, y derruyendo los fundamentos sociopolíticos sobre los cuales se basaban las viejas democracias, que, como nos dijeron desde Aristóteles a Tocqueville, son la base de la democracia. En el citado libro de Revaud d'Allon, esta autora propone que la democracia no se puede restringir a sus instituciones, a sus procedimientos, sino que es un tipo de sociedad que es necesario estudiar como una experiencia subjetiva. Y por ello, para que haya democracia, deben existir demócratas. Es cada vez más claro, como decían Platón, Aristóteles, pero también una autora contemporánea como Martha Nussbaum, este régimen de la democracia solo puede existir si la población tiene las capacidades necesarias para vivir en él y si el Estado promueve estas capacidades, la adquisición de estas capacidades. Y Tocqueville describía cómo la democracia en América era posible porque había personas que leían periódicos, que participaban activamente en asociaciones civiles, que tenían y practicaban una cultura política democrática. Este autor consideraba que el individualismo era el mayor peligro de la democracia, no solo porque permitiría que el Estado se erigiera sobre los individuos aislados y los dominara, sino porque la democracia no es posible si los individuos están aislados. Al tiempo que se destruían las organizaciones intermedias en las últimas décadas, el desarrollo de los medios de comunicación, las organizaciones intermedias que permiten, que posibilitan, que son el caldo de la democracia, el desarrollo de los medios de comunicación, en especial del Internet, las plataformas sociales y ahora la inteligencia artificial, han facilitado la circulación de información política y la participación política individualizada, virtual, en aislamiento. Los nuevos medios de comunicación ofrecen un acceso a la política sin intermediaciones, ¿no? O sea, la energía de la que hablaba Tomba de política, de que digamos, la gente, las personas quieren participar, tienen deseo de participar políticamente. Esto el Internet se los da, y se los da mucho más fácilmente que antes, inclusive de forma inmediata. Los nuevos medios de comunicación ofrecen un acceso, sin embargo, sin intermediaciones, sin discusión con otros, con individuos encerrados en esferas autónomas, monadas colectivas, construidos por efecto de los algoritmos, además, en los que nos llevan a solo leer lo que confirma nuestras ideas y nuestros sentimientos. En el presente es posible que cada uno de nosotros se haga una idea de lo que sucede en el mundo sin necesidad de diálogo, de deliberación, lo que para Hannah Arendt era central, ya que la política se construye en conjunto, en un diálogo conflictivo con los demás individuos, con los que están de acuerdo con nosotros y con los que no lo están. Además, en este mundo virtual, son las emociones más que la razón las que juegan un papel preponderante, como plantea el importante libro de Eva Illouz. Como escribe Illouz, los sectores políticos de extrema derecha son especialmente poderosos a la hora de dar forma a narrativas que otorgan significados emocionales a experiencias sociales. En este caso, las que generan la asincronía de las temporalidades, el sentimiento de incomprensión y resentimiento de amplias capas de la población. Además, la globalización neoliberal ha tenido como consecuencia la concentración de los medios de comunicación en manos de grupos que se han afiliado a los movimientos de extrema derecha y que han logrado forjar armas formidables para distorsionar las conciencias. En Europa y los Estados Unidos, Murdoch, Elon Musk, Bolloré en Francia, en México, Televisa, TV Azteca, Brasil, Grupo Globo, entre muchos otros. Esos medios difunden una percepción del mundo social a través de marcos causales sociales defectuosos, como plantea Luz. Explicaciones viciadas de los procesos sociales y económicos, como lo define esta autora. Viciadas no quiere decir falsas, ya que contienen huellas de una experiencia social real, huellas que producen razones con coherencia interna, pero que son distorsionadas por especialistas en comunicación y hábiles políticos, lo que permite que estas narrativas tengan efectos sobre ambas capas de la población, aunque vayan en contra de sus intereses. Son narrativas distorsionadas, aunque parezcan coherentes, dado que están construidas por elementos contradictorios o falsos, como por ejemplo que el desempleo es generado por los migrantes. Expresan la percepción que las personas tienen de su bienestar en una situación determinada. Se sienten verdaderas, aunque ignoren las causas reales de los acontecimientos y en muchas ocasiones vehiculen acciones públicas contrarias a sus intereses, como por ejemplo el apoyo de las clases obreras al Brexit o el voto de las poblaciones afroamericanas y latinas por Trump. Según Luz, el impacto que consiguen estas narrativas se debe a su capacidad para otorgar significados emocionales a experiencias sociales. Y lo logran porque solo las emociones, nos dice Luz, tienen el poder multiforme de negar la evidencia empírica, desbordar el propio interés y responder a situaciones sociales concretas. Y para ello bastan mensajes políticos simples, imágenes y frases cortas. Los medios de comunicación acentuaron aún más las características que Adorno y Horkheimer habían descubierto en los viejos medios. Los mensajes simples, de pocas palabras, y ahora de imágenes, shock, apelan a las emociones más que a la razón. Las explicaciones de los científicos sociales, los políticos de izquierda, son muy complejas porque la realidad es muy compleja y obviamente los populistas, los autoritarios, los movimientos de derecha, extrema derecha, usan imágenes y frases simples que apelan más a la emoción, como decía, que a la razón. Bueno, es de esta manera, así concluyo, que como nos ha recordado Massimiliano Tomba, las incertidumbres e injusticias legítimas en las que viven muchos habitantes en el mundo actual están siendo instrumentadas por movimientos de extrema derecha para derruir las democracias e imponer sistemas de gobiernos autoritarios con tendencia al neofascismo que se asemeja al del pasado, en tanto concibe la política como guerra y por su odio al otro, por razones no solo sociales y culturales, sino raciales, pero que tiene características propias que debemos desenmascarar. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias al profesor Ilan Bisberg por este comentario. Nos quedan aproximadamente 7 minutos para hacer una ronda de preguntas. Tengo una pregunta que ya nos llegó por redes sociales y estamos en espera de recoger quizá un par más para que nos dé tiempo de que el profesor Tomba responda y tomemos una pausa antes de la siguiente mesa. Entonces, abro el espacio. Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, les pido por favor que se presenten si es posible para que la audiencia pueda conocerles.
Gracias, Melina. Hello, my name is Luisi Pedrosa. I'm a professor here at the Centro de Estudios Internacionales as well. And thank you for this very thought-provoking presentation, and also to Ilan for this wonderful comment. I have a comment regarding this asynchronicity of temporalities that you observe. I think that just as authoritarian leaders try to accelerate some processes and disrupt the democratic processes by executive orders, by changing democratic procedures, there is behind that acceleration a willingness to perpetuate themselves. So in the end, they want to justify these accelerated procedures by saying our project is of long endurance, and we need to stay in power. We need to secure that our party, that our movement, that this new ideology is rooted into politics. So there is a slight tension, right, in the argument of how they disrupt the temporality of liberal democratic politics. I would say that they are definitely trying to disrupt the times allotted by law to democratic procedures, but it's not clear to me that they always want to accelerate it, precisely because they want to perpetuate in power and extend presidential limits and so on. So I take from Ilan's comment that he added another adjective to the kinds of asynchronicity that you observe, and that's subjective. And the subjective asynchronicity, to me, it seems very relevant, because what I see and I hear take something from Kudakwashi Vanyoro. This is a South African scholar who recently spoke at our seminar for the Studies on the Future. And he says that there is this chronopolitics at work in the very manipulation of that occurs in politics to say, some people have been left behind, and we need to speed up things so that they can catch up with the rest. So there's a sort of also creation of a relative deprivation argument. I think this is very compelling when I look at, for example, the voting patterns for the extreme right in some countries in Europe. I am closest to Germany. I follow that the most. And I see that the voters for the AfD are not necessarily the poorest voters. And they are distributed also in West Germany. So it seems that this fabrication of a relative deprivation, of an argument that you have been left behind, even though people have their basic needs covered, is working. And I would like to listen to your reflection on this. Also provocation.
Muchas gracias a la doctora Pedrosa. ¿Tenemos otra pregunta por ahí? Bueno, leo la que recibimos por internet. Es una pregunta de Dexter Martin. It seems that accelerationism is historically encoded in the modern state. Is there another possible conception of the state out of this path? Y adelante, profesor Tomba, gracias.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you. So, I would say, what are the right wing or the authoritarian governments? What they try to do is can be called a kind of acceleration. They want to speed up processes, but they want to speed up processes of decision making. Maybe they want to basically resynchronize, to use these two terms, the formal constitution and the material constitution. The material constitution is, basically our society, it's the global society, it's all this messy web of different powers today. And then we have to think that our formal constitutions had been written basically more or less all of them after the Second World War. And it was a very different material constitution, was a different society, it was an industrial society. In Italy, it was, and here as well, a mix of industrial society and peasantry. So it was a very different social fabric. So the point is the formal and the material don't match anymore. I think the right wing, the authoritarian leaders are doing the job. They are resynchronizing the two constitutions in a way we don't like or we like, but this is something that, I sound kind of an idealist, that something that the cunning of reason has to do, something that has to be done, so in a way or in another. And this is what is going on. But I think the interesting thing about the authoritarian leaders and what is going on in authoritarianism today is, in my opinion, the subjective dimension that you mentioned. I think this is much more interesting to me, because this subjective asynchronicity is related to, with a lot of things that Ilian said. It's about the subjective feeling of acceleration. The subjective feeling of my experience is basically garbage. I cannot orient myself in the present with my knowledge and experience because of acceleration. Rosa, Kozelek, they pointed out this problem. Now the point is that in a time in which we are deeply disoriented and we feel that the future can be even worse or very risky, then I would say the only available temporality is the past. Let's go back. Let's try to restore something. And this is a kind of this is how the past can be subjectively and politically mobilized. So the so-called right wing, they mobilize things like religion, family, tradition, sense of belonging. Now, I would say, as Ernst Bloch said in the 30s, stop, hold on, because these things belong to us. These things belongs to the left, belongs to the forces of emancipation and liberation. That was Ernst Bloch accusation against the Nazis. He said even the term Heimat as a radical left reading, interpretation, and meaning. So Bloch, and I agree with Bloch, understood a couple of things. These terms that had been abandoned or had been left by the left are now weaponized by the right wing. And they are doing that very well. The point is how to take it back, how to take back all these terms that belong to a different tradition, a tradition of liberation and emancipation. And even, again, the title of my last book is Revolution and Restoration. And restoration was the term that was used by the insurgents for the entire 19th century. So the communards in 1844 revolutions, they were talking about restoring the social fabric. They didn't use the term revolution. Revolution is an ex post script that we used to read the 19th century. Enough already. So the term restoration was the language of radical insurgents in the 19th century, and they wanted to restore the social fabric. But today, the term restoration immediately is associated with something conservative or authoritarian. We have to break the spell. And we have to find a way to use our language and terms in a new way. Otherwise, we just corner ourselves. And this is the subjective dimension you were talking about, I think. I don't know if I answered all your questions, but I tried. Yeah. Oh, there is another, that is a very difficult question. Yeah, and Dexter Martin, I know who asked the question. It was a visiting student at UCSC for a while, and we had many conversations. And now, just a few months ago, he defended his dissertation here in Mexico City. So his question is if acceleration or even this kind of authoritarian path is embodied in the logic of the state, the question is there an alternative path? Just not to end with a dark pessimism. I would say yes. But my answer, and Dexter knows my answer is yes. But in order to even see this alternative path, this different path, we need different terms and concepts. That is easy. No, because I think we scholars, philosophers, we don't create concepts. And the concepts which are available to us are totally inadequate to go through these alternative paths. So basically we are stuck if we think, how can we use the current concept, even very radical concepts, to find a radical path? My answer is you can't. The best thing you can do is you can create some neologism and believe that your neologism is a new concept. It's not. It's just a word. Now, my point is a concept can emerge from real practices. So we have to become, we academics, a little bit more humble and try to understand what is the theory in action in real existing social political movements. This is what we should do. And there are many movements in which we see this kind of a reanimation of concepts through practice. Is the imperative mandate, a feudal medieval institution that has been reanimated by so many populist movements. And when I had a conversation, when I had a conversation about imperative mandate in the US, and because it sounds a little bit closer to what they have in the US, we don't have it in Italy. It's called the recall. It's the right to recall a representative. And this is an institution that is more often used by the right wing, by the Republican than the Democrats. And I had a conversation with a very radical colleague, and he said, oh, this recall is garbage, the Republicans, they use it all the time. I said, how is possible, basically, that you don't know that the imperative mandate was one of the basic institutions in the Paris Commune, was one of the basic institutions during the Russian Revolution. It was the basic institution of the enragés. And so it was a tradition, but we forgot the history of these institutions. And now we think that these institutions are just monopolized by the right wing, and therefore they should be also bad by definition. No, they are alternatives. And what is interesting is that I cannot reanimate institutions like imperative mandate by writing an article. But there are so many social practices in which you can see imperative mandate in action. An imperative mandate is not only the right to recall representative, it requires a kind of a dispersed idea of a sovereignty. It requires the reanimation of the intermediary bodies we were talking about. So all these things are related. I think there is a gigantic need for politics, but it's just a need. It's like if you are hungry, there is a need for food. And we don't know what kind of a food is available and what kind of food can be cooked. But there is a need for food. And we have to work with that need. And there is a need for politics that can go in many different directions. And I think we have to work, at least my job as an intellectual, with this kind of an open field of possibilities. And try to understand these alternative paths, that was the question of my colleagues, these alternative paths on the basis of what is going on, what the people are doing, real experiences, the real practices. And in my Insurgent Universality book, I wrote a chapter on the Zapatistas. with this idea is what I can learn in terms of a theory from their practice. Yeah. I'm done.
Muchas gracias nuevamente al profesor Tomba por esta conferencia, al profesor Ilan Wiesberg por su comentario que nos permitió ampliar el panorama, vincular con otras ideas y literaturas. Muchas gracias. Gracias a todas, a todos por su presencia en esta primera mesa. Tenemos unos minutos para tomar café, para tomar un descanso y nos vemos inmediatamente después a las 11:30 para la próxima mesa. Gracias.
Thank you.